just so everybody is aware. Tell a friend, tell an enemy, tell whoever you want. Next week, I'm going to do a detour, and I'm going to, rather than talk about Ecclesiastes, I'm going to interrupt for, I hope it's only 1 week, to talk about what it means to be a Baptist. Yes, what it means to be a Baptist, and what it means to be a Baptist, and what it means to be in a Baptist church. And so, being a lifelong Baptist, as I like to point out, I was a Baptist before I was a believer. We will talk about what it means to be a Baptist and what it means to be in a Baptist church, and how that, hopefully the third point would be how that relates to our church. Understand it. So that's going to be next week. Then we'll get back into Ecclesiastes after that. And then the very long term, after that, I don't know how much longer we're going to be in Ecclesiastes. I think after, and we'll talk a little bit about why today, but as we get into the second half of the book of Ecclesiastes, it kind of goes into more of just a wisdom book, as opposed to he kind of dials back the whole meaningless element and gets more like wisdom in terms of like Proverbs, like the book of Proverbs. But even still, it's still within that whole context of being under the sun. But to me, I think it should move. That's why I keep thinking it's going to move, and then I end up camping out on a verse for 2 hours, and next thing you know. And then after that, I figure I may do a day or two on Song of Solomon, just because it's right there. And one of the commentaries I have covered is Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon. So I've already got the commentary. Why not? And then from that point on, I'm not. This changes on an almost weekly basis. As far as what I'm going to do after that. Right now, the idea is to do 1 Corinthians. Go to talk about 1 Corinthians, and part of that has to do with a lot of the discussion of the church and how the church operates and things like that. And there's a lot about that in 1 Corinthians. And then, what was I going to do? Was it Genesis after that? No, can't remember. Then Genesis, or maybe it was Genesis, Matthew, Daniel, Revelation. Maybe, I don't know. These are all the ideas. But next week, and it'll be recorded like today's is. So, but today is April 16th. Not a lot of stuff. Actually, there was a lot of stuff that happened on this date in history. It's just, when I say there's not a lot of stuff, it means there's not a lot of stuff interesting to me that happened on this date in history. But it was on this date in 73 A.D. that Masada fell. The fortress of Masada, which is it's a great big rock south of Jerusalem, and we've been there. And if you've seen the movie, where it's kind of it's a good movie. It's a long movie, but it's a good movie. If you can get over the fact that all of the Romans have British accents, it's great. But that's where some of the zealots kind of holed up there, because it was a fortress, and ended up killing themselves rather than be taken by the Italians with British accents. It was also on this date in 1521 that Martin Luther arrived at the Diet of Worms, or the Diet of Worms, I believe is how you would say it in Germany. This was in 1521. This is where he was called to stand in front of the council and explain or recant or confess his sin of rebelling against the Catholic Church. And this is where he is reputed to have said, "Here I stand, I can do no other, God help me." And he left from there, went to the castle, was captured by I forget the guy's name now, by one of the rulers, who he was captured and hidden in the castle of Wartburg for 2 years, where he spent most of the time translating the Bible into German. But that 1521 was the day that he arrived there. So those are the only two things of interest that happened on this date. I mean, today is Wilbur Wright's birthday. as in the airplane Wilbur Wright, Orville and Wilbur. It's his birthday. He was born in this state in 1867. And also it is Charlie Chaplin's birthday today. He was born in this state in 1889. So that's it. That's the only, again, I don't know what else happened on this date, but that was all that is interesting to me. So, be that as it may. Long pause this, the long pause, that way I can add it in just however I want. But today we're going to continue our discussion of Ecclesiastes. As you may or may not recall, Ecclesiastes is written by a guy named, or the main character is a guy referred to as Qohelet, and it either is written by Solomon or somebody who wants you to think it's Solomon. I am of the opinion that it's not actually Solomon who's writing the book, but that's subject to interpretation, and we'll get to that a little bit later because that actually comes up a bit today. So then, and he's talking about the nature of life under the sun, and it's kind of a deistic look. It's kind of like one way to look at it is say, here is what life is like at the peak of Israel's power, at the peak of Israel's influence. Here are all the things wrong with life, which kind of gives you the idea, or you should walk away from the book with an understanding that, wow, there's, even at its peak, it didn't achieve what you'd think it would, that the city did not match all of the different, or the country, did not, the nation did not reach the pinnacle of what God intended it to be for a number of reasons, I assume. And maybe if in my very, very long-term plan, if I ever do like Kings or Samuel or Kings, we'll kind of talk about that as well. So today we're in chapter 5. We're going to do chapter 5 and 6 today. We're a little bit about worship, and then most of 5 and 6 has to deal with money, which is always a fun topic to talk about. In chapter 5, I'm going to read verses 1 through 7, and then we'll come back and talk about it a little bit. Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. Go near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools who do not know that they do wrong. Do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven and you are on earth, so let your words be few. A dream comes when there are many cares, and many words mark the speech of a fool. When you make a vow to God, do not delay to fulfill it. He has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill your vow. It is better not to make a vow than to make one and not fulfill it. Do not let your mouth lead you into sin, and do not protest to the temple manager, my vow was a mistake. Why should God be angry at what you say and destroy the work of your hands? Much dreaming and many words are meaningless. Therefore, fear God. Okay? So here, Qohelet is kind of giving some thoughts about the approach to worship and how the people that he sees underneath him or in his vicinity, how they approach worship. And one of the things I think he thinks is just sort of a flippant approach, or maybe not flippant isn't the right word, but a routine approach to worship. That it's just, okay, well, if it's Tuesday, or if it's Saturday, you got to go to the temple, got to go do that temple thing. Okay? And we all kind of fall into this. It's like, if you've ever, I remember we were in a church once that because we were meeting in this school, and the school didn't have air conditioning, and the pastor had this abnormal fixation with air conditioning. Even at the time, I was like, Sunday morning, I didn't think it was going to get that hot in the room that, because it was an auditorium, it was a big auditorium, but. And so he made an arrangement to go, we were going to borrow this other church on Saturday night, and it was an air-conditioned church. We were going to go into this air-conditioned church on Saturday night, and so then Sunday morning, we were not in church for like a 2 or 3 month time period. And I just remember one of the things about that is there's, especially if you've been going to church your entire life, that suddenly a Sunday morning, you're like, okay, my head tells me I've been to church this week, I've done the church thing, but I feel like I should be in a church somewhere. kind of thing. And so actually one of the things that we did during that time was we went to other churches on Sunday. And I believe we came here, didn't we? Wasn't that one of the... This was a long time ago. This was 03 or 04 or something like that. But be that as it may. And so you know, Solomon or Qohelet here is giving the instruction, guard your steps as you go up to the temple. Be careful what you're doing. Be careful what you're saying. Okay? Don't just get carried away in the moment and just say whatever, you know. Be careful what you're saying. Guard your steps. And I think I'm going to blow through this because I think I ended last time on this as well. But he says, don't be quick with your mouth. Okay? Don't be quick with your mouth to listen. Go near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools. Do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart. It kind of reminds me of the passage in James. And there's one of the things that's interesting about this particular passage we're going to be talking about today is all of the different references that it calls to mind. But in James 1:19, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And of course, James goes on quite a bit to talk about the tongue as a raging fire and all of that stuff as well. One of the things I wanted to bring back is, like, you know, what does he talk about? The sacrifice of fools. Okay, what is that? Sacrifice of fools. Well, specifically, we don't know, and that's the trouble with Ecclesiastes. I mean, it's kind of referring to a lot of stuff we don't know. One commentator, Ian Provence, calls it the careless observance of religion. Just the careless observance of religion. And I think we could all agree that we've got a lot of that going on today. Okay, you know, you've got a lot of people. One of the things that's interesting about the Godfather movies. Has anybody seen the Godfather movies? I've seen it. Great. They're great films. But one of the things that's interesting about the Godfather movies is how dedicated they are to the church. These guys are gangsters, right? You know, and yet, you know, oh yeah, kids are all baptized, and, you know, infants are all baptized, and at one point there's one of the guys, and I forget which film it is actually hanging with the Pope. You know, he gets an audience with the Pope. It's like, okay, you know. But, you know, this careless observance of religion, it's like, okay, well, you know, I went to church twice this month. I don't need to go again. I've read my Bible enough. I don't need to do it anymore. I don't need to seek God's, you know, this careless observance of religion. And I think perhaps at this point in time for Israel, again, this is representing Israel at its peak, Israel under the Solomonic kingdom. That this is when Israel should have been its most powerful, its most influential, and Qohelet is looking at it and say, wow, we just have a careless observance of religion. This is just a sacrifice of fools going on out here. Okay. But he says, do not be quick with your mouth, do not be hasty in your heart. A dream, going down to verse 3, a dream comes when there are many cares, and many words mark the speech of a fool. Okay, and this is something that's going to come up. You'll notice when I say many words mark the speech of a fool, put a little asterisk there, because we're going to come back to that idea later. Okay, but again, it's just one of those. You know, there's a scene in Shakespeare where in Hamlet, there's a character Polonius, and this is if you've ever seen Hamlet more than once, which as a matter of fact we have seen Hamlet more than once, 30 times to be exact, 30 different productions. That's not including the videos. That's just live productions. But there's one character in Hamlet. The character is Polonius, and he is a character that no two directors ever treat the same. You know, he sometimes he's a fool. Sometimes he's a very smart individual. Sometimes he, you know, comes across as a very manipulative. Sometimes he comes across as a dimwit, depending on how the professor or how the director wants to do it. But there's one scene where he's going to explain to the king and queen why Hamlet seems to be crazy. And so he starts going on this long speech, and then he says in there, you know, since brevity is the soul of wit. So brevity, you know, brevity is the soul of wit. And then of course he's castigated by the queen, who says, hey, you know, more matter, less art. You know, and he's like, no matter, I use no matter. I'm sorry, I could go on. So that's how I judge whether I like the Hamlet production or not, is how they treat Polonius. But be that as it may, so that brevity is the soul of wit. You may have heard that particular line. That comes from Hamlet. That comes from Polonius. This idea of saying more by saying less. Okay? And he says, when you go up to the church, when you're going to the temple, don't, just kind of keep your mouth quiet. Keep your mouth shut. Don't be hasty in what you have to say. Don't let your mouth lead you into sin, which I think is an interesting command. Don't let your mouth lead you into sin. Don't. I can't remember who. I don't know who. It's not a question of you can't forget what you never knew in the first place. You know that, right? So when I say I can't remember, that's not correct, because I don't know who said this in the first place. But there's something about don't let your mouth write checks that your life can't cash, or something along that line. Do you know what I'm saying? Again, something that's same line, same idea. And I think we've all kind of been there, where somebody says, oh, I wish we had somebody that could do something that's, and in a moment of weakness, yeah, I think I could do that. Just kind of pondering, yeah, I think that's possible. And next thing you know, you're committed to doing something that you didn't want to do in the first place. And you're like, wait, how did I get signed up for this? Kind of thing. But again, don't agree to hang around people that you shouldn't be hanging around. Don't let your mouth lead into sin. And in the end, he says, do not let your mouth lead you into sin, and do not protest to the temple messenger. My vow was a mistake. Now they don't know what this is, but the implication is that you would go to the temple, and something about being at the temple, you would be asked to commit to something, and the temple would follow up with you. Hey, did you take care of that? Okay, and so somebody from the temple would come by and say, hey, Rebecca, remember where you promised that you were going to do this thing for us? And he said, don't be in a situation where you have to say, oh, I'm sorry that was a mistake. I shouldn't have said anything. That's not going to fly, especially if you're in the temple, because that's where God dwelled. But why should God be angry at you for what you say and destroy the work of your hands? Much dreaming and many words are meaningless. Therefore, fear God. Now, he's bringing this point up. Fear God. He said that before. And actually, when we get to the very end of the book, he says, what is the conclusion of the whole matter? Fear God. Fear God. Okay. Now, with that, he goes into verse 8. From 5:8 through to the end of chapter 6, he has a long discourse on money, finances, cash, mammon. So, in the New Testament, they talk about, you cannot serve God and mammon. That's the King James. I think the NIV translates it money. Although mammon is the King James, or the Old English word mammon connotes more than simply, dollars and cents. That it has more to do with the entire financial system, as opposed to just simply how much cash you have in your wallet, kind of thing. But be that as it may. So, and he's talking about the different aspects of it. And then beginning with verse 8, here I said in 5:1 through 6:9 deals mostly with money / mammon. Okay, now in verses 8 and 9, if you see the poor oppressed in a district and justice and rights denied, do not be surprised at such things. For one official is eyed by a higher one, and over them both are others higher still. The increase from the land is taken by all. The king himself profits from the fields. Now, Q here, Qohelet, is clearly talking about a system that is inequitable. That, he is looking at the system that is inequitable. And who's to blame? Another line from Hamlet. The king's to blame. That's not from Polonius. Polonius is long dead by the time the king's to blame. But it's Polonius' son who says the king's to blame. But he says here, the increase from the land is taken by all. The king himself profits from the fields. Now, this is another passage that suggests that Solomon himself is not actually the author of the book. Okay, because here, the author is saying you've got this inequitable system, that it is structurally set up in such a way that you're going to have this oppression going on, and justice and rights denied. Why does this happen? Well, because one official is eyed by higher, and over them both are higher. So there's sort of a hierarchy where everybody's kind of covering everybody, looking at what they're going to do. And it's, what do you expect? What can you expect in a situation under the sun? Okay, and the king is profiting from them. Now, what's interesting about this is if you look back at 1 Samuel, I think it's 1 Samuel chapter 8. Let me go back there for a minute. If you remember the story in 1 Samuel 8, the first 8 chapters, Samuel is one of the great leaders of Israel. He's both a prophet, he's a priest, and he's a judge. But he's not a king, and his kids aren't really turning out that well. And so the people come up to him and say, basically they tell him, your kids are lousy. We don't want to be ruled by them. We want a king. And Samuel, of course, is a little miffed about this. And then he goes to God, and God says, hey, lighten up. It's not you they're rejecting, they're me. But God says, tell the people this about a king. So in 1 Samuel 8, verses 10 and following, Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, this is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands, commanders of 50, etc. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. He will take a tenth of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials. Your male and female servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take for his own use. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. So here I think Qohelet is saying, and to a certain extent I think God is saying, I told you so. I told you this was going to happen. But he says here, don't be surprised. You shouldn't be surprised. I told you this was going to happen. And really if you think about it, of all the things that it's difficult not to say, isn't I told you so like the most difficult thing not to say? Like something happens and you said, don't do that or this will happen, and the person does it anyway, and then they come to you for help. Maybe they know better than they come to you for help. I don't know. But they come to you for help, and your head is exploding because all you want to do is say, I told you so, right? Is anybody? Okay, none of you have ever been in there. Okay, maybe it's just me. But I told you that was going to happen, okay? And that's, so to me this is almost funny, in a very sad sort of way. But it's like, here, don't be surprised. Don't be surprised at this. This is what happens. You got what you wanted. You didn't want to do it God's way. You wanted to do it your way. You got what you wanted. Now don't complain to me about it. But going on, beginning in verse 10, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves, that's one of my lines, okay? Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This, of course, the story goes that, John D. Rockefeller, who, by the way, was a Baptist,
University of Chicago,
which was a Baptist school. And I think it still is technically a Baptist school. If you look at it, you're looking at their charter or whatever, it's still considered a Baptist school. And they do have a very highly regarded divinity school. I don't know that they've ever graduated anybody remotely conservative, but it is a highly regarded divinity school there. But the story goes that somebody once asked John D. Rockefeller how much money is enough, and he's reputed to have said a little more. Okay, now nobody knows where that happened. It's one of those things that everybody knows, quotes on, but nobody can give the exact source or the exact newspaper article. But because it meets our idea, we go, it must have happened. But, whoever loves money never has enough. Now, if you look over, and again, in 1 Timothy, as soon as I say that, that should, come up with a couple of 1 Timothy 6. And I'll just read Paul's injunction here, beginning with verse 6. But godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Okay, so again, you wonder if Paul, writing this to Timothy, was thinking about what Qohelet had said here, that this is what happens. Again, money in and of itself, for the love of money is the root of all evil. And again, that's one of those deals where, it isn't that money is the root of all evil, it's the love of money is the root of all evil. One of those oft misquoted passages. But still, it says, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. And again, I don't know whether Rockefeller ever said that or not. I mean, Rockefeller was at one point an outrageously wealthy guy. I mean, far more wealthy relative to the rest of the world than Gates or Buffett or any of these guys are today. I mean, Rockefeller at one point was single-handedly had enough resources that he could stave off a countrywide depression. I mean, this was a guy who had a lot of money. Okay, but even still, how much? There was a book that came out a few years ago called The Number. Does anybody know about that book, The Number? Okay, and it had to do with how much money do you need to retire? How much money has to be in the bank? What is your number? And they were talking about how whatever your number is. And here's a shock. That number is always going up. Okay, it never goes down. The number is always going up. How much do you need to retire? Well, I need to, and so because, I get a lot of these sort of, Business Week and all these different finance magazines and stuff like that. There's always, every month or every couple weeks, there's another article about, how much you need to retire. And of course, once you get past the whole, I've retired already, it's kind of, oh, now you tell me, sort of thing. Now I tell me I should have had this much money, okay? But be that as may, again, how much is enough? Oh, it's just a little more. How much you have? Oh, just, if I had a little more. You heard this say, like, expenditures rise to meet income. That's one of those financial rules, expenditures rise to meet income, that a person who has a huge house and 2 cars and a kid in college, well, his or her number is going to be much higher than somebody who doesn't. And yet, even somebody who doesn't says, how much you need? Maybe just a little more. Okay, not that that's loving wealth, I'm just saying, but it's kind of just an illustration, how much is just a little bit more. As goods increase, verse 11, so do those who consume them, and what benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes on them? And I think here he's talking about just possession for its own sake. I mean, how many of you have ever collected something, or you actively collect something, and so you have the thrill of the hunt to collect it. You're collecting something, and then once you've got it, once you have it, it's like, okay. The desire and the act of the hunt was more interesting than the actual possession of the thing itself. I mean, and I can think of a bunch of stuff. I mean, I don't have the complete set, as I'm missing one. I'm missing one of a set of Hardy Boy books. Anybody read Hardy Boy books as a kid? Okay, so I have a, and I could go on and on and on, but there's the original production of Hardy Boy books were red covers with white dust jackets. Okay, and there were 22, 21 of the first 22 Hardy Boy books were written by the same guy. And not the guy whose name is on the cover. That guy doesn't exist. But those are in the world of Hardy Boy books collecting, and yes, there is a world of Hardy Boy books collecting. Those are called the canon, those 22. And I have, I think I have 21 of the 22 in their original printing, in the original, it's not original, but like close enough, right? Except for one. And that one is often referred to as the Holy Grail, because it's like $20,000 to find one. And I have not yet figured out a way to get it past the boss, if you know what I'm saying. That it is worth it to us to pay $20,000 to have a book you put on a shelf and go, okay, I'm done. So, I'm just, so I still have the thrill of the hunt. I keep thinking that I'm going to walk into an antique mall one day and go, look, hey, they don't know what they have, right? Isn't that why we go to antique malls? Because in the hopes that they don't know what they have? Yeah, it could happen. It could happen. And this afternoon we're going to go hit some. Now I'm motivated to it.
What's she missing?
Yeah. But be that as it may, it actually reminds me. There's a book that came out several years ago, called "Your Money or Your Life." Has anybody read it? Your Money or Your Life? It's by a guy named Joe Dominguez and Vicky Robin, I believe, and they talk about a concept. And I don't have a. I need a. Can you see this? Yeah, that's. There's a consumption chart they talk about, and on here you have down here your x-axis is the number of units owned of whatever it is, whatever thing you're collecting or doing or whatever, and this is your satisfaction level. So how satisfied you are with it. So when you first start getting something, if you don't have it and you want it, you're down here, but then you get one and you're like, oh, that's great. Great, and the more you get, but with just about anything, there reaches a point where suddenly anyone take economics, the individual marginal utility of the item starts to vary, kind of go down and down and down until at some point it just doesn't matter to you at all. Pardon me?
Bell curve.
Well, it is a bell curve, but the point that this particular book makes is that what do you call this point right here? What do you call that point right here? And I won't take guesses. What that's called is enough. Enough. And one of the things that this particular author says is like when you reach enough of whatever this is, you should stop. Stop collecting whatever it is, But be that as it may, I have to erase this because otherwise everyone will be watching and going, what is that bell curve behind his head?
Change your argument on satisfaction to value. You convince your CFO that if you buy it for $20,000 in 10 years, it'll be worth 30, and then you can sell it.
I think my CFO knows better than the fact that I will sell it. That's the problem.
And then your kids will
Yeah.
gone like that.
Yeah.
You're just buying it for somebody else's.
Right. Or my kids won't recognize what it is, and they'll just sell it to some antique mall for $5 and go, yeah. So, but be that as it may. So, as goods increase, so do those who consume them, and what benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes on them? The sleep of the laborer is sweet, whether they eat little or much. But as for their rich, their abundance permits them no sleep. Now, this is a relative statement. It says here, per Q, laborers sleep much better than the rich do. This is relative, and this is an assumption he's making. I don't know that Qohelet has done a sleep study or that there's a sleep lab on that, but he's just saying, you know what? And the assumption here, I think, is he's looking at the rich kind of with a sort of a jaundiced eyes. And, if you didn't get it legitimately, then you're not going to be content with it. I think that's, to me, where he's going with this. But this passage leads into another point. Oh, I'm sorry, let me go on. Verse 13 through 15. I have seen a grievous evil under the sun. Okay, not just an evil. This is a grievous evil under the sun. Wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners, or wealth lost through some misfortune. Like a collector's book that your kids, So that when they have children, there is nothing left for them to inherit. Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. They take nothing from their toil, so they can carry it in their hands. Okay. Now, this particular passage brings to mind several other passages that come up in the various, either before or after this. For example, in Luke chapter 12, beginning with verses 13 through 21, you have the parable of the rich fool. This is the guy who has all kinds of stuff, and he says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to tear down my old barns, and I'm going to build new barns. And he said, you fool, this night will your life be required, kind of thing. It's like, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners, or wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when they have children, there is nothing left for them to inherit. Also in Matthew 6:19 through 20, where Jesus, as part of the Sermon on the Mount, talks about treasures in heaven. Build up treasures in heaven, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and thieves do not break through and steal. You know, or in Job 121, it says, everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. Job in 121, he says, naked came I into this world, and naked I go out. Okay. In Deuteronomy 8, there's a passage, I'll just read it to you because this one does not flow trippingly from the tongue, another phrase from Hamlet. Moses is talking about it to the people. He says, and when your herds and flocks grow large and your silver and gold increase and all you have is multiplied, then your heart will become proud and you will forget the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. He led you through the vast and dreadful wilderness, that thirsty and waterless land, etc., etc. You may say to yourself, verse 17, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth and so confirms his covenant, which he swore to your ancestors as it is today. If you ever forget the Lord your God and follow other gods and worship and bow down to them, I testify against you today that you will surely be destroyed. So if Qohelet, and I think really, if Qohelet is a writer after the fact, and I think it is. I think Qohelet is somebody who's writing certainly after the breakup of the kingdom, possibly into one of the captivities. That perhaps he's looking at he's thinking of this particular passage and going, wow, this is what happened. We got rich and we kind of forgot where it came from, and God took it away from us here. As everyone comes, so they depart, and what do they gain? Since they toil for the wind, all their days they eat in darkness with great frustration, affliction, and anger. Now this is an interesting idea, and I think the point here is that they've been reduced to the point where they have to work, and they're coming home so late that they have to eat in the dark. Okay, now this is a depressing metaphor. Okay, this is supposed to be depressing. I say that because you may or may not know this, but there's a real weird, hot trend in dining to dine in the dark. Is anybody aware of this? There are restaurants, Google it if you don't believe me, where you go dining in the dark. And you go into the restaurant and it'll either be, they'll put a blindfold on you, or they'll have the lights off, which makes it hard to serve the food, I know, which is why the blindfold is a little better. But literally, you pay money to eat in the dark. That's just how weird American society has gotten today, okay? So there should be a depressing metaphor, and there are people that are paying a lot of money, and it's expensive, And so the point is, you pay a lot of money, and you remove, and then all you have is just this, the smell and the taste, and, again, I don't trust cooks that much in restaurants. I want to know what it is. I want to see it. Is it still moving? Does it have a face? What?
Presentation is a very big part of eating.
Right. So I'm just saying, despite what American society is doing, people with way too much time and money, or have been to way too many restaurants where this is interesting to do. Qohelet is saying this is a negative thing. Okay. However, in verse 18 through 21, we have another 18 through 20. We have what one writer calls another joy section. Okay, or a bright spot. So we have another bright spot or a joy section of Ecclesiastes. This is what I have observed to be good. This is Qohelet talking. This is what I have observed to be good. That it is appropriate for a person to eat, to drink, and to find satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life God has given them. Okay, now, that doesn't exactly sound thrilling, but given all of the nasty things that Qohelet has been saying, he's like saying, it's okay to enjoy eating. It's okay to enjoy your work. And Debbie and I just finished up a class at this graduate school we're at, I know you're thinking, Debbie and I are in the same class. Well, who got the higher grade, right? You all are thinking that, okay? Well, I will admit, Debbie got the higher grade. She has always gotten the higher grade. Okay, this time she got the higher grade, and I am not making this up, 0.11 difference. 0.11 difference. Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, yes, thank you. 0.11. She doesn't need to because she knows I will. 0.11. Do you know how annoying it is to lose by 0.11? You know, it's like, okay, it's...
That's the silver medalist in the Olympics.
Yeah. Yes, 0.11. So, but this particular class was called Theology of Work, where you talk about how the Bible approaches work, how the church approaches work and ministry to work. It's an interesting thing. And one of the things that I did, my final project was to create the template for a class on it, on theology of work, which I may do here after I deal with being a Baptist next week and then being whatever the other things, at some point down the road. But I would do it, but I think Debbie would stand up and she would say, you know, Stan, you're about 99.89% correct there, but let me fill in the rest for those who, you know, but not that she would ever do that. Not that she, you know.
I was the one person in the class that did not take the option of creating a course of theology of work. I applied theology of work to my field, to gardening and gardening communications.
But one of the points here is that God created work. One of the principles of the theology of work is that God created work, and work is something that is to be enjoyed. And this is part of your ministry. Okay, and so here Qohelet is saying something similar. It's okay to enjoy your work. It's okay to enjoy your eat, to drink, and find satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life God has given them, for this is their life. Moreover, verse 19, when God gives someone wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot and be happy in their toil, this is a gift from God. Okay, recognizing your gifts, recognizing your assets, for lack of a better word, as being a gift from God. This is a gift from God. They seldom reflect on the days of their life because God keeps them occupied with gladness of heart. Now, this is kind of leaning into the idea that the retribution principle. You know, the retribution principle is that if you're rich, it's because God has blessed you. Okay, and if you're poor, it's because God has not blessed you for whatever reason. Okay, and this is one, the retribution principle. Again, that's like all about the book of Job. It's all about the book of Job. If you've ever read the book of Job, if you ever actually sat down and read the book of Job, you know that it's just these four guys having this long conversation with Job saying, will you just confess what you did? And Job saying, I didn't do anything. That's it. That's like the entire book of Job right there. Okay, you've heard it here first. But the whole idea is you're being punished. You must have done something wrong. And Job's saying, no, I didn't. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. No, I did. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. But it was like if you weren't doing anything wrong, you wouldn't have been punished. Okay, and here God is saying, these guys, or Qohelet is saying, the fact that God has blessed them, and God is, that's how they seldom reflect on the days of their life because God keeps them occupied with gladness of heart, kind of thing. So, in other words, you should just should just enjoy the simple pleasures of life. Okay, so, we want the big moment. We want a lot of the. We want to have a real happy, a huge trip. But it's like, I think Qohelet is saying, under the sun, just enjoy the things. Enjoy the fact that, you know what, you look outside, you go, yeah, it's kind of a wet, miserable day. But it was 75 degrees yesterday and super nice out. Did anybody go outside yesterday? Okay, see, it was a super nice day yesterday, and it'll be a nice day later in the week. Just kind of enjoy this, and this is an opportunity. Okay, can't go outside, but I can work on stuff inside. I can do stuff inside today. Okay, just enjoying the simple pleasures of life. Chapter 6, I have seen another evil under the sun, and it weighs heavily on mankind. God gives some people wealth, possessions, and honor. Now here he's going to, speaking of the retribution principle, God gives some people wealth, possessions, and honor so that they lack nothing their hearts desire, but God does not grant them the ability to enjoy them, and strangers enjoy them instead. This is meaningless, a grievous evil. Okay, now here remember we talked about in chapter 2, Qohelet is complaining about the fact that I'm getting all of this wealth, and who's going to inherit it? Or he's talking about how sad it is that you put all of this money, you accumulated all of this stuff, and then somebody is going to get it, and it's not going to be you, and you have no control over it, and you did it because you're righteous, but the person who's going to get it is not righteous. And I think he's kind of revisiting that particular idea. This is meaningless, a grievous evil. Okay, so Q turns his attention to a person who accumulates wealth but can't enjoy it. So verse 3, a man may have 100 children and live many years, yet no matter how long he lives, if he cannot enjoy his prosperity and does not receive proper burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. Okay, so again, it's like, what's the purpose? Qohelet is like, we got people who have accumulated so much stuff that they can't enjoy it. Okay, and if you ever, some people have talked about this, and have you ever heard anybody say, and maybe you've said it, I've heard about these rich, but are they really happy? Have you ever heard somebody say something along there? And they're not really happy. They've got to hire security guards. They got to lock their house and kind of stuff. And then I think I have a brother-in-law who once had a shirt, just a T-shirt, that said, again, not that I base all of my theology on what I've seen on T-shirts, but if you can't find a bumper sticker, what do you do, right? But it's like, I've been rich and I've been poor, and believe me, rich is better, kind of thing. But he's like, if you've got all of this and you can't enjoy it, what good is it? What good is it if you can't? And he said, and Qohelet is saying, a stillborn child is better off than that. And again, this is going back to something he said earlier in chapter 4, where he said, better the child is never born than the child who has to go through the life of misery and toil. Okay, it would be better if he were never born, verse 3. And in fact, does not receive proper burial. Verse 4. It comes without meaning. It departs into darkness, and in darkness its name is shrouded. Though it never saw the sun or knew anything, it has more rest than does that man. Talking about the stillborn child. Even if he lives 1,000 years twice over, but fails to enjoy his prosperity, do not all go to the same place. And again, remember we talked about one of the ongoing principles of Ecclesiastes is the reality of death, and death is the final arbitrator. That's it. And as far, there isn't a well-developed idea of an afterlife in the Old Testament. Doesn't mean it's not there, just saying it's not well-developed. It isn't until a lot of stuff happened during the captivity. And a lot of the writings had been accumulated by that time, and they all started sitting around going, there's got to be more than just this. And then you said, but even by the time of the New Testament, again, not everybody agreed that there was a resurrection. If you remember, the Pharisees did, but the Sadducees did not. And Paul takes advantage of that. Paul blows up a meeting by saying, hey, I'm like the Pharisees. I believe there's a resurrection. And the Sadducees go nuts in this particular meeting. Okay? So he says, do not all go to the same place. Again, remember he said back, what benefit does the fool have over the wise? None. We all go to the same place. We're all going to die. Okay? Everyone's toil, verse 7, is in their mouth, yet their appetite is never satisfied. What advantage have the wise over the fools? That's what he said in chapter 2. What do the poor gain by knowing how to conduct themselves before others? Better what the eye sees than the roving of the appetite. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Okay, better what the eye sees than the roving of the appetite. Okay, some have looked at this and said that this is basically the idea of bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, kind of thing. Martin Luther, who on this date in 1521 approached the diet of worms, Luther wrote a commentary on, I believe he wrote a commentary on Ecclesiastes, but he said about this particular passage, it was like the Aesop's fable about the dog with the bone or the piece of meat in his mouth. And this dog goes to the river, and he looks in the river, and he sees the reflection of another dog with meat in his mouth, and he sees, wow, the reflection, in the reflection, he sees that dog has a bigger piece of meat in the mouth than I've got, and so I'm going to let go of the meat that I have in my mouth to get that meat. You know what happens? He opens his mouth, drops the meat, suddenly the dog in the reflection doesn't have any meat, kind of thing. So Martin Luther looked at this passage and said, yeah, that's what he's talking about here. The idea what you can see is better than, and perhaps we've seen this in our own, it's kind of like you can't see the forest for the trees is another kind of idea that goes along that line. You have somebody who's bemoaning their life, and you look at their life and you go, wow, everything is great. Well, I could have been a contender. I should have been a professional baseball player. I'm just gonna, woe is me, I'm not a professional baseball player. There was a time in my life where I thought I wanted to be a professional baseball player. Then I had my 3rd birthday and it was over. But no, I mean, and I think a lot of guys, y'all ever think you were going to be a professional baseball player, professional sports? I was on the baseball team, starting on the baseball team. Oh yeah, I'm going to be a professional baseball player. And so I can bemoan my life that I never had a chance to be a professional baseball player. And there's a reason for that. It's because I'm not nowhere near good enough to be a professional baseball player. But be that as it may, it says, better what the eye sees than the roving of the appetite. This is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Okay. Better what the eye sees has been compared to a bird in the hand, or Aesop's fable. Okay. Now, 10 through 12, finish up real quick here, is kind of a transitional passage. 10 verses 10 through 12 are a transitional passage. He kind of summarizes a little bit what he's talked about, and then we're going to go into when we get into chapter 7, it's more of simply a series of wisdom discussions, more like Proverbs. Now, it's not completely divorced, but, there's still some coming in. Okay? But he says, whatever exists has already been named, and what humanity is has been known. No one can contend with someone who is stronger. Now, the first part of this, whatever exists has already been named, and what humanity is has been known. Okay, again, he's just reiterating chapter 1, verses 9 and 10. That is, there's nothing new under the sun. Whatever is has been known. Okay, he's not saying, I'm not saying anything new. I'm telling you something you don't already know. Okay, I mean, I was in a class the other day, substituting in a health class. And this particular teacher had a door that shook all the time in this particular class. I don't know why, but this particular door was constantly shaking, which is really, really annoying because like every time something shook in the building, this door would shake. And when the door shakes, you think there's somebody at the door. So you spend the whole time going, what? So, I'm sending her an email now. I said, listen, I'm probably not telling you anything you don't already know, but you have the most annoying door in the school. Just trying to think, if I told her, she would say, hey, I need to call somebody from maintenance and fix this thing. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. He says, there's nothing new under the sun. No one can contend with someone who is stronger. Okay, so some have looked at this and said, okay, is he just talking about, don't pick fights with people? Or is he saying, listen, this is the way God has made it. You can't contend with it. God is stronger than all of you. So either way it goes. But verse 11, the more the words, the less the meaning. And how does that profit anyone? Remember where I told you to put an asterisk up there and that third line? Here, this is where the asterisk comes back. The more the words, the less the meaning. Okay? The more the words, the less the meaning. And how does that profit anyone? Have you ever asked somebody a question that really you just want a yes or no answer? And they start to explain and give you a very long answer, and you're like, yeah, you could have just said no, And so I've heard, I imagine, maybe this is just my imagination, that maybe when I was dreaming, I would have these kind of conversations with my better half, where I would say, do you want to this or that, or yes or no, do you want to do this? And then I would get this, and I'll say, so no. Right? No, is no the answer? Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe I'm the one that gives you the long answer. The more the words, the less the meaning, kind of thing. Brevity is the soul of wit. That is what Shakespeare said, or Polonius, actually. For who knows what is good for a person in life during the few and meaningless days they pass through like a shadow? Who can tell them what will happen under the sun after they are gone? So again, I mean, this is Qohelet looking at it. Again, to me, this is like a mini summary of everything he said. I mean, seriously, who really knows? You know, here we are at the peak of our influence. We are at the peak of our influence as far as a nation goes, as far as a blessing goes, as far as a dwelling. And do we really know what's happening? It's just like, you know, it's not what I thought it was going to be. You know, there's just something is not connecting here with Qohelet. You know, and I think, again, looking at the entire book of Ecclesiastes, okay, again, you take any one verse and you're just going to be off on a rabbit trail. But you look at the entire book of Ecclesiastes and you could say, listen, man by himself, it just doesn't match up. It doesn't add up. It doesn't bring you the kind of satisfaction you think it will. And so it's like, well, we can do it on our own. Well, go back to Ecclesiastes. I don't need the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. I don't need God to be happy. I don't need God to be fulfilled. All right, that's what they thought in Ecclesiastes, and see how happy they are. How happy is Qohelet? And, you know, and that's, again, the book goes on and on talking about this. And so, listen, it's all these different areas where, you know what, it's really just not, you know, life apart from God, under the sun, distinct from God, just doesn't add up. Just doesn't make it. It's not doing it for me. Okay, I think that's how we would say it. That's how the kids would say it these days. It's just not doing it for me, kind of thing. Okay, beginning with verse 7, we will talk. We'll start this not next week. We'll talk about it 2 weeks, because next week we're going to talk about being a Baptist, which has little to do with Ecclesiastes, or then again, maybe it has a lot to do with Ecclesiastes. I don't know. What it means to be a Baptist, what it means to be in a Baptist church, and how that relates to our church here. So tell a friend, tell a relative, tell a Baptist wannabe, you know, and we'll talk about that. Any questions here before we go? Yes.
Qohelet, you're assuming is the author of
Yes.
Ecclesiastes. How old do you think he was when he wrote this?
How old do I think he was? Oh, I don't know. I would see. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Never really thought about that. I would assume that it was somebody in the priesthood, given his familiarity with the temple worship and things like that, and having given some time to know the story of Israel and where it is. So I would say, you know, certainly well into middle age, but that's a completely guess. I've never really thought.
That's interesting, because it seems to me that that's when most people, when they get to that 70, 80, that's when they start thinking, oh, you know, wish I would have maybe done some of the things we really should do.
This is the point where I say, well, let's ask somebody who's 70 or 80, and then turn to somebody in the room, and, you know, but I won't do that kind of thing.
Just as there isn't anyone here.
That's right. That's right. All of us being 35. 35 is such a good age to be. I've decided to stay there. You know, no reason to go beyond it. Any other questions? Or?